Welcome to History Hiker. Today, while we're not at a battlefield or a cemetery or a fort, we are in Mobile, Alabama. And so, briefly, I do want to talk to you about a particular doctor's connection to Mobile, Alabama. The doctor's name is Anderson Abbott. Now, Anderson's parents were free black men or black people from Mobile, Alabama. They lived in Mobile in the 1850s. They owned a general store in Mobile, Alabama. And if you look from the 1830s to 1850s, I believe there were somewhere around 540 free black people in Alabama. As time progressed a little bit, that number increased, but even after that, it steadily began to decrease, even after an increase. At one time, I'm going to say before the Civil War, there were maybe 1,200 free black men in Alabama. But today, as I said, we're going to talk about a Dr. Anderson Abbott, who, as I've already said, his parents they lived freely in Mobile, Alabama. But the city of Mobile desired to make that difficult on them. And so they moved out of Mobile. The reason is that the city of Mobile passed a law that free black men had to pay a bond if they were going to be in Mobile. So several other cities done the same thing. And so while today $500 wouldn't seem like a lot of money, but in the 1850s, $500 would kind of, I believe, if I remember correctly, would be somewhere around $14,000 of today's money. So that is quite a bit of money. So when this law was passed and Anderson's parents did not buy the bond, they were threatened that if they didn't buy the bond, then their store would be destroyed. So they moved out of Mobile and they moved to New Orleans for a period of time. And then from New Orleans, they lived in New York. And then from New York, they moved to Canada, where Dr. Abbott's father invested in real estate. So because of their prominence in Canada, I believe they lived somewhere around Ontario, it provided Anderson the opportunity to attend colleges that he probably would not have been able to attend in the southern United States, or maybe even in the United States, period. So over time, Anderson went to medical school in Canada and was the first black doctor in Canada. He found a friend or a mentor who was Dr. Augusta during his time in Canada. And Dr. Augusta moved to New York, where he became a doctor for the United States military. And so, as I said, Dr. Abbott followed him. He also became one of the first black doctors to join the United States military. This is a picture of Anderson Abbott. And I also have a picture of if I can do this, picture of Dr. Augusta. There is an account from both of them where they received an invitation to we'll call it a party at the White House. They showed up at the White House in their military uniforms. I believe Anderson Abbott would have been a captain. Dr. Augusta would have been a major. So they show up to the party at the White House in their uniforms and said that they were greeted by people there. And they said that the people couldn't have been more shocked at their appearance at this White House gathering. Anderson says that if they had been dropped from the ceiling into the crowd. So, but I do want you to remember as we go through this in the next couple of minutes, is that Anderson and Dr. Augusta were invited to the White House. Now, even though they were free black men, they had been to school, they were well educated, even as doctors and surgeons in the United States military during the Civil War. They were not allowed to see white patients, but they were over and worked at what at one time was called the Contraband Hospital in Washington, but was then called later the Freeman's Hospital. And I do have an artist drawing of that hospital that I want to show you so you can see what type of area it was. I hope that you can see that well. So they were there, but that's where they worked, let me say it that way. Over time, they grew, I guess, more prominent in Washington in their service. But let's fast forward through a couple of years. So there was a night that Abraham Lincoln went to an opera. And we are all familiar with that. I believe it was April of 1865. We're all familiar with John Wilkes Booth. We are familiar that during that opera, John Wilkes Booth shot Abraham Lincoln. There was a doctor there also at Ford's Theater that night. This is the image of that doctor who was there. And he was just a regular physician in the U.S. military, not a surgeon. But when Lincoln was shot and they found out that Lincoln was shot, it was that doctor that went to the president's box, examined the president, felt the bullet hole behind his ear, and removed the blood clot from behind the president's ear to ease the pressure that was building inside of the president's skull, hoping to minimize any damage that might be done due to that. But as we all know, they moved him from that theater to across the street. And once they were across the street, or while they were still at the theater, the Surgeon General shows up, who I believe was Dr. Barnes, image of Dr. Barnes. He was there arrived at the theater also. So when they move Dr. Barnes, or when they remove Lincoln to the house across the street, Dr. Barnes is there. 13 other doctors are going to arrive at that house and examine President Lincoln. One of those doctors that was at the house that night was Dr. Anderson Abbott. Dr. Abbott, I guess you could say he stood watch as other doctors would come and go that evening, watching over President Lincoln, his body, his breathing, his pulse rate, and those type of things, making sure that the president was comfortable. Because of what Dr. Abbott did, and let me say it this way, he stood his post and watched over President Lincoln during that time. President Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, presented Dr. Abbott with a shawl. But this was not just any shawl. This was a shawl that belonged to President Lincoln. This was her way of thanking him for doing what he did. And so I guess this story in itself amazes me. This is probably a lesser known individual during the Civil War, and especially, I guess, maybe lesser known to many because he was a black man. So he's not really featured a whole lot, talked a whole lot about. But after the war, he goes on and gets involved in the civil rights movement in Canada. He is actually the president at some point for a year, or maybe a year and a half, of the first black nursing school in New York. So he does not, like so many seem to do sometimes, fade off into obscurity. But like I said, he was involved in the civil rights movement in Canada. He's continued to work in the United States in education. He was a writer. He wrote for periodicals that went all the way to England. So I just thought that this was interesting. I thought his life is interesting. We may talk more about Dr. Abbott and a couple of other doctors that were in the room that night that President Lincoln was shot and in the room when he passed away. So one of our things that we like to do as we hike through history is maybe cover some lesser known facts. But one of the other points I want to make with Dr. Abbott is that there is a Mobile, Alabama connection to Dr. Abbott that is through his parents. So in closing, let me say thank you for taking this time to hike through history with me.